women's suffragette movement. Some of them were jailed and imprisoned, and I'm a woman. There would have been time where I would have been with them too. When I was 18, I went in my first time voting. I remember what an empowering experience that was and how I felt I can make a difference.
The background of this painting is made up of ballots and voting pamphlets from the 1920 election, which was the first election that women from coast to coast could vote.
My name is Terese Garcia, and I'm a non-representational artist. I did go to college, and I was actually a poli-sci major with an emphasis on international relations. And there was a period in my life, I have to be honest, when, because of my political leanings, where I would get a little frustrated and wonder if it makes a difference, because it just seemed like the corruption or more socialistic paradigms in government society just really wasn't happening. But then as I'm older now, what I do realize is I've come full circle that to me it's still very important.
I'm trying to unpack the complicated relationship with voting rights that we have here in the United States. Each painting is of an individual who would have been denied the right to vote at some point in time. This first painting, Terese Garcia, Monterey County, is a portrait of my friend, Terese. It is hard for me to imagine a time when someone like Terese would not have been allowed to cast her vote.
There's a lot of bloodshed in the world. There always has been, and perhaps there always will be. But there's a lot of peace in the world too. It's got me thinking about voting now, present tense. So I still think it's important because it's peaceful. You're putting your thoughts and motivations and intentions of what you want to see through candidates or measures, and you're doing it without bloodshed. It's like a opening to express yourself politically and socially and culturally.
Just speaking for myself, there are a lot of times when I take the right to vote for granted. Obviously, it mattered to women suffragists like Susan B. Anthony, who's quoted as saying, "Someone struggled for your right to vote. Use it." The fight for women's suffrage began in the 1840s, but did not get established coast to coast until 1920. That was only 100 years ago.
I was taking a drive to LA and I was listening to, I think it's called KUSP, it's the Pacifica. They were doing a program on motivational speakers in the world. And they played Dr. Martin Luther King's speech when he was in London in 1963.
We've had very little violence, and I think this is the eternal credit of the civil rights leaders who've advocated nonviolence.
His speech was so empowering about rising above the inequalities in life, voting for things that are going to be prominently and expressively beneficial to all humans without bloodshed. For him to say that in light of the fact that his people and our people, African American or people of color, are still being subjugated to torture, for him to still have that high ideal and never give up, I was like, wow. So to me, voting's like that. Voting is a way for me to express I'm not going to give up.
The first suffrage organizations were established in 1869. There were two competing organizations at the time. One was led by Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and the other by Lucy Stone. Then, after a few years of rivalry, they merged in 1890 as the National American Woman Suffrage Association. Suffragists made numerous attempts to vote in the early 1870s and then filed lawsuits when they were turned away. Susan B. Anthony was actually arrested for voting in 1872. The Supreme Court ruled against them in 1875. The suffragists were not deterred. They began a decades-long campaign for an amendment to the U.S. Constitution.
Back in the day when I was a student, I did used to protest against the apartheid. I did, do passive protestations and was out there with my signs. And so I think it's very important. I think I would have been along the lines with those women out there holding signs, because I do feel when there's inequalities and injustice in this country, at least we can still do that. We can still let people know, hey, there's an inequality going on. I'm here to let you know that. We're asking you to please make a change, not with bloodshed, not with guns, not with torture, but with our actual hearts telling you this is not right. Things need to change. We hope that you will agree and help this amendment pass or whatnot. So that's how it happens in this country, because that ideal democracy is here.
While I was working on this painting of Terese, I really tried to think about what would it be like to live in a country where my voice, my vote, didn't matter? What are the causes today that may feel hopeless and may get defeated over and over again, but people still relentlessly fight for? And who were the people that resisted that progress? There were many men and women who were a part of the anti-suffrage movement. Women should be strong enough to keep in the background because the limelight never makes anything grow. That's a quote from internationally known children's book author Kate Douglas Wiggin speaking to a group of anti-suffragists back in 1912. According to Corinne McConaughey, who teaches political science at George Washington University, the female leaders of the anti-suffrage campaign were generally women of wealth, privilege, social status, and even some political power. In short, they were women who were doing pretty well under the existing system. This makes me think about my own privilege. What changes are happening that I could be taking more part in, but maybe I'm resisting in some way because I enjoy the privilege?
Maybe I do take it for granted that I can vote. I think most of us do, because how can we even imagine living in a time where women weren't allowed to vote? I probably would have been on the lines, just marching. I've done it before, and I have done it recently too during this last administration's election. I have done it too for the environment. There were certain protests the year that he was elected in 2016. There was a women's march that was just local that I went with, and then also on Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday, there's one here. Yeah, I think I would have been marching and helping the fight, helping the cause towards something that I feel is more just than excluding people from our basic rights.
In 1916, Alice Paul formed the National Woman's Party, which was a militant group focused on the passage of the National Suffrage Amendment. Over 200 supporters, they called themselves the Silent Sentinels, were arrested in 1917 while picketing the White House. Some of them went on hunger strikes. They endured forced feeding after being sent to prison. This was no joke. In August of 1920, the 19th Amendment became part of the U.S. Constitution. It states, "The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex."
I know democracy is an ideal, but so is everything. Everything in life's an ideal. When you try to practice that ideal and it comes to fruition, then man, you cannot beat that. Get out and vote and do whatever you can, and don't feel like you don't matter, because you do.
When this was first passed, women did not come out and vote in nearly the same numbers as men. That didn't happen until 1980. So can you believe from 1920, it took all the way up until 1980 before an equal number of women to men actually showed up at the polls to vote. From 1980 until now, women have voted in elections in at least the same percentage as men, and sometimes more.
The only way to correct something that's not balanced or helping everybody and it's hurting people is to express that, regardless. To me, it's not really a matter of giving up, where you're hopeless because you feel like there's nothing you can do. That's exactly the time, I think, to do. At my age, I've realized that it's more about empowerment and inclusivity when you vote.
In the 2016 election, only 54% of eligible voters took part.
Vote and even get more involved if you can, but at least the voting is something that we can all do. It's free. It doesn't matter which side, it's more about the actual act of voting.
Every voice matters. If you need to register yourself to vote, go online right now to vote.ts.gov. .gov.
I think my painting is phenomenal. It's got the dimensionality within the collage and the portrait that has this effect of going back and forth in space, which to me is intriguing, it's fascinating. The lightness of it, it's got a very light touch, but yet it's strong because it's got different layering going on. It's very, I think, very beautiful.
I'm Paul Richmond. Thank you for watching this first episode of Voter Profile.